April 29th, 1945, Dachau concentration camp, Germany. American soldiers of the 45th Infantry Division approached from the southwest. What they found stopped them cold. 39 railway boxcars on the tracks. Inside, 2,000 skeletal corpses piled so high the smell overwhelmed battle-hardened troops. Then they entered the camp. More bodies. Prisoners so emaciated they looked like walking skeletons, eyes hollow, bodies reduced to skin over bone. SS guards in the towers kept firing. They knew what was coming. They knew what the Americans were about to discover. When those soldiers saw the full horror, something inside them snapped. What happened next wasn't in any manual, wasn't official policy, but by day's end, dozens of SS guards lay dead, shot after surrendering. And this wasn't isolated. From France to Poland, a dark pattern emerged. SS soldiers who raised their hands sometimes never made it to a POW camp. They were separated, lined up, shot. The question isn't whether it happened. It did. The question is why. This wasn't random violence. This was soldiers encountering physical evidence of what the SS had done. To understand why SS soldiers were executed upon capture, you have to follow the trail of horror they created across Europe. Most people don't know the Holocaust reached North Africa, but in 1942, as German forces retreated through Libya toward Tunisia, Jewish communities became targets. In Libya, Afrika Korps soldiers plundered Jewish homes in every town they passed, property seized, men rounded up for forced labor. In Benghazi alone, 2,000 Jews were deported across the desert. 1/5 died from starvation and exposure. When the Wehrmacht entered Tunisia in November 1942, they brought the SS with them. Walter Rauff, the man who helped develop mobile gas vans for mass murder in Eastern Europe, was posted to Tunis. His mission? Implement the final solution in North Africa. Over 6 months, 5,000 Jewish men were forced into 40 labor camps, deliberately placed near bombing targets and front lines. Several hundred died before British forces liberated the region in May 1943. But North Africa was just the beginning. On the Eastern Front, the SS waged total war on civilians. German military reports, their own documents, recorded systematic rape during anti-partisan operations. Women were branded on their bodies, whore for Hitler's troops, then raped repeatedly, many murdered afterward. In Borisov, dozens of women and girls were raped and killed. One teenager was tortured, mutilated, and nailed to boards before murder. In Lviv, women were assaulted in public parks. Priests who intervened were shot. This wasn't combat chaos. This was organized brutality. The Wehrmacht established military brothels across occupied territories. In Smolensk, hotels became officer brothels. Hundreds of women and girls were rounded up in raids, dragged through streets in full view of neighbors. Synagogues and churches were converted. Women were held as prisoners, forced to serve German soldiers repeatedly. Medical inspections protected soldiers from disease, not women. Those who resisted were beaten. Those who escaped were executed as examples. This system spread across Poland, Yugoslavia, France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Rape was rarely prosecuted, only when it damaged military discipline. But the worst discoveries came when Allied forces liberated the concentration camps. At Auschwitz, Soviet forces found 7,000 prisoners barely alive, those too sick to be evacuated, when the SS fled days earlier. They found rooms filled with 7 tons of human hair, cut from victims before they entered the gas chambers. Mountains of belongings carefully sorted and cataloged. 370,000 men's suits, 837,000 women's garments, thousands of children's shoes arranged by size. The gas chambers with their fake shower heads, the crematoria where bodies were burned by the thousands. Evidence of industrial-scale murder that defied comprehension. At Bergen-Belsen, British forces found 60,000 prisoners. 13,000 corpses lay unburied. Typhus rampant. 500 dying daily. soldiers saw prisoners so starved they ate the dead to survive. At Dachau, American forces found 32,000 prisoners, railway cars filled with corpses, crematorium ovens still warm, SS guards running this death machine until Americans arrived. These weren't rumors. These were physical, undeniable horrors Allied soldiers walked into with their own eyes. They could smell it, touch it, see living skeletons stumbling toward them, weeping with relief. And standing in the guard towers, wearing black uniforms with death's head insignias, were the men responsible. Now imagine you're that 22-year-old American soldier. You've seen combat, lost friends, but nothing prepared you for this. You've walked through a concentration camp, seen things you'll never unsee. And now the men who did this stand before you, hands raised, asking for Geneva Convention protections. What would you do? After the Malmedy massacre, where SS troops murdered 84 captured Americans during the Battle of the Bulge, fury swept through Allied ranks. The murders happened at a crossroads near Malmedy, Belgium. American soldiers were captured, disarmed, lined up in a field. SS troops from the 1st SS Panzer Division opened fire with machine guns. Survivors were hunted down and shot. 84 died. When word reached other American units, rage replaced discipline. The 328th Infantry Regiment issued orders. No SS troops or paratroopers will be taken prisoner, but will be shot on sight. The 90th Infantry Division executed Waffen-SS prisoners so systematically that headquarters had to order them to take prisoners alive for interrogation only. At Chenogne, Belgium, on January 1st, 1945, 15 days after Malmedy, soldiers from the U.S. 11th Armored Division captured 80 German prisoners, assembled them in a field, shot them all. Roughly one execution for each American killed at Malmedy. General Patton wrote in his diary, "We also murdered 50-odd German med. I hope we can conceal this." They did. The incident was covered up. None were punished or investigated. At Dachau's liberation, exact numbers remain disputed, but multiple first-hand accounts confirm American soldiers shot SS guards after they surrendered. Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks, who commanded the troops entering Dachau, later testified he saw American soldiers machine-gunning SS guards who had already laid down weapons. Some estimates suggest dozens were killed, possibly more. One American soldier there described it simply, "We had just walked through hell, and the men running hell were standing in front of us, asking for mercy." Supreme Allied Commander Eisenhower issued a brief statement, "Our forces liberated and mopped up the infamous concentration camp at Dachau. Approximately 32,000 prisoners were liberated. 300 SS camp guards were quickly neutralized." That word, neutralized, covered multiple actions that day. But here's what's crucial. Despite these isolated incidents, the vast majority of SS soldiers who surrendered were not executed on the spot. They were taken as prisoners of war, processed, documented, and many eventually stood trial. The Allied powers made a deliberate choice. Justice through law, not vengeance through bullets. Even in the darkest moments, even when soldiers had every reason to pull the trigger, most chose to follow orders. Most chose to let courts, not rage, determine guilt and punishment. At the Moscow Conference on October 30th, 1943, long before war's end, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin signed the Declaration of Atrocities. They agreed Nazi officers would be punished in the countries where crimes occurred. On November 20th, 1945, the International Military Tribunal began in Nuremberg. 24 top Nazi leaders were indicted. 22 stood trial. For nearly a year, the tribunal presented evidence to a watching world. Prosecutors showed footage of concentration camps taken by Allied military photographers during liberation. Scenes so horrific that people wept in the courtroom. Documents meticulously detailing the final solution. Transportation schedules for trains carrying victims to death camps. Orders signed by the defendants themselves. And survivor testimony. men and women who had lived through the camps describing what they witnessed. On October 1st, 1946, verdicts were delivered. 19 convicted, 12 sentenced to death, 3 to life, 4 to prison terms of 10 to 20 years. On October 16, 1946, 10 were hanged. Hermann Göring, Hitler's second-in-command, escaped execution by swallowing cyanide the night before. But Nuremberg was just the beginning. Poland demanded justice for crimes on Polish soil. Between 1946 and 1949, approximately 1,000 suspected Auschwitz war criminals were extradited to Poland. 673 were charged, including 21 women. Rudolf Höss, first Auschwitz commandant, was arrested in March 1946. His trial lasted March 11th through 29th, 1947. 200 witnesses testified, many survivors. On April 2nd, 1947, Höss was sentenced to death. On April 16th, 1947, he was hanged at Auschwitz itself, next to the gas chamber he had overseen. The Supreme National Tribunal in Krakow held a second major trial. 40 defendants from the Auschwitz SS garrison. 23 were sentenced to death, including Arthur Liebehenschel, Maximilian Grabner, and Maria Mandel, who signed death lists for approximately 500,000 prisoners. On January 24, 1948, all 23 were hanged. Maria Mandel and Therese Brandl were executed first. 6 others received life imprisonment. Allied military tribunals across Germany, Austria, and Italy conducted thousands more trials. American military courts at Dachau tried 199 defendants between 1945 and 1947. German courts continued for decades. Frankfurt trials between 1963 and 1976 convicted multiple defendants, 6 receiving life sentences. So why were SS soldiers executed upon capture? The honest answer? They weren't supposed to be. Military law was clear. Geneva Conventions were explicit. Orders from Eisenhower prohibited executing prisoners under any circumstances. But when soldiers came face to face with the evidence, when they walked through concentration camps and saw mountains of corpses, found railway cars filled with skeletal remains, looked into eyes of prisoners starved and tortured for years, something broke inside some of them. Rage overrode discipline. Horror overrode training. The urge for immediate justice overrode military law. These weren't official executions sanctioned by command. These were breakdowns in military discipline, understandable perhaps, even predictable, but still violations of the laws of war. And here's the crucial distinction. These incidents were exceptions, not the rule. For every SS guard shot at Dachau, dozens more were taken prisoner. The vast majority of SS soldiers who surrendered survived to face formal justice. Thousands stood trial. Hundreds were executed after proper legal proceedings. Many more served decades in prison. But in scattered moments across the European theater, at Dachau, at Chinogne, in unnamed fields, some Allied soldiers made a different choice. They had seen what the SS had done. They had walked through the camps. They had held dying prisoners. And in those moments, some decided justice couldn't wait for a courtroom. History doesn't celebrate these moments. They remain dark footnotes, understandable to those who witnessed what these soldiers witnessed, but still violations of the principles the Allies claimed to fight for. The true justice came later, in Nuremberg, in Krakow, in courts across Europe where evidence was presented, witnesses testified, and verdicts were delivered according to law. Because the ultimate answer to evil isn't more violence, it's accountability, it's documentation. It's creating a record so complete and undeniable that no one can ever claim it didn't happen. The SS left a trail of horror across Europe. Allied soldiers followed that trail. And when some reached the end, when they opened gates at Dachau or Bergen-Belsen and saw with their own eyes what had been done, a few decided those responsible had forfeited their right to due process. That's why some SS soldiers were executed upon capture. Not because it was policy, but because of what they had done, what they represented, and what Allied soldiers saw when they found the evidence. It's a story about the limits of human restraint when confronted with inhuman evil, about the line between justice and vengeance, about men trying to process the unprocessable and respond to atrocities that defied comprehension. History records both responses, those who chose law and proper procedure, and those who, in crucial moments, chose differently. Both groups had seen the same horrors. Both made choices they would live with forever. And perhaps that's the answer we must accept. The story of why some SS soldiers were executed upon capture is ultimately about humanity confronting the absolute worst of what humans can do to each other: industrial genocide, systematic torture, the deliberate murder of millions, and struggling to find the right response in those impossible moments. The SS's legacy is one of systematic brutality, industrial murder, and crimes against humanity on an unprecedented scale. The trials that followed World War II established a crucial principle: that those who commit atrocities cannot hide behind uniforms or orders. For more untold stories from history's darkest conflicts, hit subscribe and turn on notifications for Warfare Unclassified. We bring you the truth behind the battles. Truth behind the battles. Truth behind the battles.